If you keep setting yourself on fire just to keep everyone else warm, don't be surprised when you're left with ashes. I want to talk to the ones who give too much, the ones who say yes when their soul is screaming no, the ones who were taught that being nice means being good, and being selfish means being wrong. You grew up learning how to please, how to be polite, how to keep the peace, but nobody taught you how to keep yourself. And now you're tired, not because life is hard, but because you've been living it for everyone else. Let me tell you something Osho understood deeply. Selfishness, the real kind, is not cruel, it's clear. Let's begin with the first truth slowly, deeply. The kind of truth you don't rush past. Being nice is not the same as being true. Most people confuse the two because they were taught early that approval equals safety. Smile so they don't get mad. Agree so they don't leave. Stay quiet so you don't cause trouble. And before you realize it, your life becomes a performance, not a presence. You learn how to read rooms instead of reading your own heart. You learn how to manage other people's moods instead of honoring your own feelings. You become skilled at keeping things smooth on the outside, while something inside you slowly tightens, hardens, aches. Truth is messy. Truth is uncomfortable. Truth doesn't always sound polite, and that's why most people avoid it. Because truth risks rejection. Nice behavior feels safer. But safe doesn't mean alive. There's a silent exhaustion that comes from pretending. It's not physical. You can sleep 8 hours and still wake up tired. Because the tiredness isn't in the body, it's in the soul. It's the fatigue of constantly editing yourself, of swallowing words, of smiling when something inside you wants to speak. Every time you choose niceness over truth, you teach yourself a dangerous lesson, that your real feelings are inconvenient, that your boundaries are a problem, that your honesty must be filtered to be acceptable. And slowly, almost invisibly, you disappear. You don't vanish all at once. You vanish in moments when you say it's fine, but it's not. When you laugh at something that hurt you, when you agree just to avoid tension, when you silence your intuition because you don't want to disappoint, and one day you wake up and feel disconnected from your own life. You're doing all the right things, being helpful, being kind, being reliable, but something feels hollow, like you're watching yourself live instead of actually living. That's the cost of fake peace. Truth has a different cost. It may cost you approval, it may cost you comfort, it may cost you certain relationships, but it gives you something far more valuable: integrity. And integrity is what allows you to sleep peacefully at night. It's what lets you look in the mirror without flinching. Truth aligns you with yourself. Niceness often pulls you away. When you are truthful, even gently, something inside you relaxes. Your shoulders drop. Your breath deepens. Because your inner world and outer world are finally speaking the same language. There is no split, no performance, no mask. People might misunderstand you. Some might even leave. But the ones who stay, they meet the real you. Not the version you created to be liked, but the version that is grounded, honest, and alive. And here's something most people don't realize. When you abandon your truth long enough, your body keeps the score. The tension in your jaw, the tightness in your chest, the quiet anxiety that never quite leaves. These are not random. They are messages, signals. The body whispering what the mouth refused to say. Truth doesn't always shout. Sometimes it trembles. Sometimes it speaks softly. Sometimes it simply waits for you to be brave enough to listen. Being true doesn't mean being harsh, it doesn't mean hurting others. It means being honest without cruelty, clear without guilt, firm without anger. It means respecting yourself enough to not betray your inner voice for the sake of being liked. Because the moment you choose truth over approval, something powerful happens. You reclaim your authority. You stop outsourcing your worth. You stop asking the world for permission to be yourself. And that's when real peace begins, not the fragile peace that depends on everyone else being happy, but the solid peace that comes from standing in alignment with who you are. Nice behavior may keep the room calm, but truth keeps your soul intact. And in the long run, a calm room is meaningless if your inner world is at war. So choose truth. Even when your voice shakes, choose honesty. Even when it feels risky, choose yourself. Even when it feels unfamiliar, because losing approval is painful, but losing yourself, that's unbearable. Then let's go deeper. There is a quiet emotion that grows inside people who give too much without wanting to. It doesn't explode all at once. It builds slowly, silently, patiently. Resentment. Resentment is not born from giving. It is born from giving while abandoning yourself. At first you don't notice it. You tell yourself you're being generous. You tell yourself it's the right thing to do. You tell yourself they need me. And maybe they do. But somewhere along the way, your help stops being a choice and starts becoming an obligation. You show up when you're tired. You listen when you're drained. You give when you have nothing left. And on the outside, you still look kind. But on the inside, something begins to rot. You start keeping score. You don't mean to. It just happens. After everything I've done for them, I'm always the one who shows up. Nobody ever asks how I'm doing. That inner dialogue is resentment speaking. And resentment doesn't make you evil, it makes you human. It's the soul's way of saying this is not honest anymore. The problem isn't that you're giving too much. The problem is that you're giving against your will. When help is forced, it stops being love. It becomes a transaction. You may never say it out loud, but inside you're waiting for repayment, appreciation, loyalty, recognition. And when it doesn't come the way you imagined, bitterness steps in. This is why people who pride themselves on being the nicest often feel the angriest in private. They suppress their needs so long that frustration turns inward. Or worse, it leaks out sideways in passive comments, cold distance, or sudden emotional explosions that seem to come out of nowhere. But they didn't come out of nowhere. They were stored, saved, delayed. Resentment is delayed honesty. If you had spoken earlier, gently, clearly, truthfully, it wouldn't have grown this sharp. But silence gave it time to sharpen its edges. There is nothing spiritual about self-betrayal. There is nothing noble about burning yourself out to be seen as good. Real generosity has a lightness to it. It feels free. It doesn't expect applause. It doesn't demand gratitude. You give because you want to. And when you're done, you feel peaceful, not depleted. The moment you feel tension while giving, that's your signal not to feel guilty, but to pause. Ask yourself, honestly, am I giving from love or from fear? Am I helping because I want to, or because I'm afraid of being disliked? Am I doing this freely, or hoping it will earn me something later? These questions are uncomfortable, but they are liberating. Because the truth is, when you give from obligation, you poison the very thing you're trying to protect. Relationships don't collapse from honesty. They collapse from unspoken resentment. And here's the hard truth most people avoid. If someone only values you when you overextend yourself, they don't value you, they value your usefulness. When you stop overgiving, some people will be confused. Some will be disappointed, some may even accuse you of changing. But what they really mean is, you stopped doing what benefited me. Let them be uncomfortable. Discomfort is not cruelty. Clarity is not selfishness. The moment you start giving only what feels genuine, resentment loses its grip. Because now your yes means yes, and your no protects your peace. You don't need to explain yourself endlessly. You don't need to justify your limits. You don't need to carry the weight of everyone else's expectations. Give when your heart is open. Rest when it's not. That balance is not a weakness. It's wisdom, because a bitter giver eventually stops loving. But a free giver never runs dry. And when you learn to give from freedom instead of obligation, something beautiful happens. Your kindness becomes clean again. Your presence becomes warm again. Your heart stops keeping score. That's when giving heals instead of hurts. Then listen closely, because this is where everything begins to turn. Most people think love starts when you give yourself away. But that's not love, that's erasure. Real love does not begin by abandoning yourself. It begins by knowing yourself. There is a deep misunderstanding about selfishness. The word itself has been poisoned. We've been taught that to think of yourself is wrong, that to prioritize your needs is greedy, that loving yourself somehow takes love away from others. But life doesn't work that way. Love is not a limited resource. It doesn't decrease when you turn it inward. It multiplies. When you neglect yourself, you don't become more loving, you become needy, you become attached, you become afraid to lose. And fear is not love. Think about it. When you are empty, every relationship feels heavy. You need reassurance. You need validation. You need people to stay, to be, rove, to promise. Your happiness becomes dependent on how others treat you, and that dependence creates pressure on them and on you. But when you are rooted in yourself, love changes its shape. You don't cling, you don't egg, you don't chase, you share. That's the difference. Selfishness in its pure form means taking responsibility for your own inner world. It means making sure your cup is full before you offer a drink to anyone else. Not because you're better than them, but because an empty cup has nothing real to give. People who don't love themselves give from desperation. People who do love themselves give from abundance. And abundance feels different. It's calm, it's steady. It doesn't rush, it doesn't prove, it doesn't overextend. You can feel it in their presence. They are not trying to be liked. They are not afraid of being alone. They don't lose themselves in relationships, they bring themselves. When you are connected to yourself, love becomes a choice, not a survival strategy. You stay because you want to, not because you're afraid of what happens if you leave. You give because it feels right, not because you're scared of being replaced. This is why self-neglecting love eventually turns into resentment, because deep down the soul knows when it's being used. Even if the mind calls it sacrifice, you cannot truly love another person while secretly hoping they will fill the void you refuse to face. That's not love. That's outsourcing your emptiness. Real love says, I am whole, and I choose to share my wholeness with you. That kind of love is light. It doesn't suffocate. It doesn't demand. It doesn't keep score. But to reach that place, you must first turn inward. You must learn how to sit with yourself, how to listen to your needs without judgment, how to honor your body when it's tired, how to respect your emotions when they speak. This is the selfishness that heals. the selfishness that builds, the selfishness that grounds you so deeply that no one can shake your center. And here's the paradox: the more rooted you become in yourself, the more generous your love becomes. Because now it's clean, it's not mixed with fear, guilt, or expectation. You don't love to be needed, you love to love. You don't give to be seen, you give because it feels natural. And people feel that difference. They may not be able to explain it, but they feel safe around you. Because your love doesn't trap them, it frees them. Self-love is not arrogance, it's responsibility. It's saying, my happiness is my job, my healing is my work. My worth does not depend on how much I sacrifice. When you stop using relationships to escape yourself, relationships become sacred. They stop being transactions and start becoming connections. So choose yourself first, not as an act of separation, but as an act of preparation. Because when you love yourself deeply, you don't love less, you love better. And that's the kind of love that lasts. Good. Now we move into the P. Lace, where most people struggle. Because this is where self-respect becomes visible. Boundaries are not walls meant to keep love out. They are doors that show people how to enter your life. When you don't have boundaries, you don't become more loving. You become more accessible. And accessibility without discernment invites misuse. Not always out of malice, often out of habit. People take as much as you allow them to take. A boundary is simply the line where your responsibility ends and someone else's begins. It's not a punishment, it's not a threat, it's a declaration of self-awareness. But many people were never taught this. They were taught that saying no is rude, that protecting your time is selfish, that prioritizing your energy makes you difficult. So they grow up leaving the doors of their life wide open, and then wondering why they feel drained, invaded, and unseen. Without boundaries, kindness becomes self-harm. Every time you ignore your limits, your body remembers the fatigue that doesn't go away, the irritation that rises over small things, the quiet dread before certain conversations. These are not flaws in your character. They are signals, warnings that something is crossing a line you never drew. The reason boundaries feel uncomfortable at first is because they interrupt patterns, and patterns benefit the people who profit from your silence. The moment you begin to speak up, the system shifts. Some people will test your boundaries, some will question it, some will push harder. That doesn't mean your boundary is wrong, it means it's new. A boundary doesn't need anger to be effective, it needs clarity. You don't have to explain your entire history. You don't have to convince anyone. A calm, grounded statement is enough. This doesn't work for me. I'm not available for that. I need space. Simple, clean, honest. The right people won't require long justifications. They may not like it at first, but they will respect it. Because respect doesn't come from how much you tolerate. It comes from how clearly you define yourself. Boundaries reveal who belongs in your life and who only belong to the version of you that had none. And here's a truth most people don't talk about. When you set boundaries, you teach others how to have them too. You model self-respect. You give permission. You create healthier dynamics, not just for yourself, but for everyone involved. Without boundaries, relationships blur, roles become confusing, expectations become unspoken, and unspoken expectations are the birthplace of disappointment. A boundary brings things into the light. It replaces guessing with honesty. It replaces resentment with responsibility. You are not responsible for how someone feels about your boundary. You are responsible for honoring your own limits. Their reaction belongs to them. Your clarity belongs to you. And yes, some people will walk away. Let them. A relationship that requires you to abandon yourself is not a relationship, it's an arrangement. When you respect your time, people learn to respect it. When you honor your energy, people adjust. When you stop over-explaining, people listen differently. Boundaries don't shrink your world, they refine it. They create space for deeper connections, real intimacy, and sustainable love. Because now, when you show up, you're not exhausted. You're present. And presence is the greatest gift you can offer anyone. So draw the line, not with fear, not with anger, but with awareness. Because the people who truly value you won't ask you to bleed to stay connected. Then stay with me, because this truth rewires how you understand guilt. Guilt is one of the most misunderstood emotions we carry. Most people treat it like a compass, as if feeling guilty automatically means they've done something wrong. But guilt is not always a signal of immorality. Very often it is simply a signal of disobedience. Not to truth, but to conditioning. From a young age, guilt was installed quietly. Don't talk back. Don't say no. Don't choose yourself. Be good. Be easy. Be agreeable. And every time you complied, you were rewarded with approval. Every time you didn't, guilt was used to pull you back into line. So guilt became familiar, comfortable, authoritative. But familiarity does not make something true. When you begin to grow, guilt almost always shows up. Not because you're wrong, but because you're doing something new. You're breaking an internal rule that once kept you safe. You're saint? Epping out of an old role. And the nervous system doesn't like change, even when the change is healthy. So guilt speaks up. It says, who do you think you are? It says, this is selfish. It says, you're hurting people. But look closely. Is anyone actually being harmed, or are they just uncomfortable? Discomfort is not damage. Many people confuse the two because they were taught that other people's comfort is their responsibility. So the moment someone else feels disappointed, confused, or challenged, guilt rushes in to say, fix this, go back, make it right. But what guilt really wants is obedience, and obedience is not the same as integrity. Here's the hard truth. If you live an honest life, you will disappoint people, not because you are cruel, but because you are no longer controllable. You are no longer bending to expectations that cost you your peace. Guilt often appears right before a breakthrough, right before you choose yourself, right before you say no without explaining, right before you stop caring what was never yours. It's a threshold emotion, and the mistake most people make is turning back the moment guilt appears. They interpret it as a warning sign, when in reality, it's often just the echo of an old agreement expiring. You feel guilty because the old version of you would have said yes. You feel guilty because the old you would have stayed silent. You feel guilty because the old you would have sacrificed. But you are not that version anymore. Growth doesn't feel clean. It feels awkward. It feels shaky. It feels like standing in a room where the furniture has been rearranged and your body hasn't memorized the layout yet. That's okay. Guilt loses its power the moment you stop arguing with it. You don't need to crush it. You don't need to justify yourself to it. You simply need to observe it. Notice how guilt rises and falls. Notice how it softens when you stay grounded. Notice how it fades when you don't obey it. Guilt is loud at first because it's used to being listened to. But when you stop treating it like a command, it becomes what it always was, a feeling, not a verdict. And here's the most important distinction. True guilt points you toward repair. False guilt points you toward self-abandonment. If you've genuinely harmed someone, accountability brings clarity. It brings humility. It brings growth. But if guilt is asking you to betray your boundaries, silence your truth, or abandon your needs, that is not conscience speaking. That is conditioning. You are allowed to change. You are allowed to outgrow roles. You are allowed to protect your energy without apologizing for it. Feeling guilty doesn't mean you should turn back. Sometimes it means you should keep going, slowly, consciously, with compassion for yourself. The goal is not to become guilt-free. The goal is to become guilt-literate, to know when guilt is wisdom and when it's just fear wearing a familiar voice. And the more you choose yourself with awareness, the quieter that voice becomes. Not because you've become careless, but because you've become aligned. Alignment brings peace. Peace doesn't ask for permission, so let guilt pass through you without letting it steer you. Let it speak, but don't let it decide. Because on the other side of guilt is freedom, and on the other side of freedom is a life that finally feels like your own. Then we move into one of the most liberating realizations you can ever have. You are not responsible for other people's emotions. That sentence alone can feel heavy at first, almost wrong, because you are taught the opposite. You are taught to be careful with your words so no one gets upset, to adjust your behavior so no one feels uncomfortable, to carry the emotional temperature of every room you walk into. And over time, that responsibility becomes exhausting. You begin to live as an emotional caretaker, constantly scanning faces, reading tones, anticipating reactions. You don't speak from your center. You speak from fear. Fear of hurting, fear of losing, fear of being blamed. But here's the truth. Emotions are personal experiences. They are responses shaped by someone's history, expectations, wounds, and beliefs. You can influence them, yes, but you cannot control them. And you are not meant to. When you take responsibility for how everyone else feels, you give up responsibility for yourself. You start adjusting instead of expressing, appeasing instead of aligning, managing instead of leading, and the cost is invisible but immense. You may think you're being kind, but what you're actually doing is erasing your authenticity to protect others from discomfort. And discomfort is not harm. Discomfort is growth. Every person has the right to feel what they feel. Disappointment, anger, confusion, sadness. These emotions are not emergencies. They are part of being human. When you rush to fix them, you rob others of the opportunity to process, learn, and grow. You also send a dangerous message to yourself that your truth is secondary to their comfort. That's not compassion, that's self-neglect. Healthy relationships are built on emotional ownership. You speak your truth with respect. They manage their response with maturity. That's the balance. When either side collapses, resentment grows. You are responsible for how you communicate, not for how it's received. There's a profound difference between being kind and being careful. Kindness is grounded. Carefulness is anxious. Kindness says, I'll speak honestly with compassion. Carefulness says, I'll say whatever keeps you calm, and calm built on silence is fragile. The moment you stop carrying other people's emotions, you feel a strange mix of relief and fear. Relief because the weight lifts. Fear because you're no longer controlling outcomes. You're allowing life to respond naturally. Some people will be upset when you change. Some will feel threatened, some will accuse you of being cold. That's not proof that you are wrong. That's proof that the old dynamic is breaking. People who relied on your emotional labor may struggle at first, they may push, they may test, but people who truly care about you will adjust. They will learn to meet you in honesty rather than expectation. And something else happens. When you release this burden, you become more present. You listen better. You speak more clearly. You stop anticipating reactions and start responding in real time. You don't lose empathy. You gain clarity. You still care. You still listen. You still act with integrity. But you no longer twist yourself into shapes just to keep everyone else comfortable. You let adults be adults. And here's the quiet power in that. When you stop absorbing other people's emotions, you give them back their strength. You stop rescuing. You stop fixing. You stop carrying what isn't yours. You stand beside them, not above them, not beneath them. That's real connection. You were never meant to be responsible for everyone's emotional state. You were meant to be responsible for your honesty, your actions, and your growth. When you accept that, something inside you settles. You breathe deeper. You speak slower. You stop apologizing for existing. And from that place of groundedness, your relationships don't weaken. They become real. So let people feel what they feel. Let them process. Let them respond. Your job is not to manage emotions. Your job is to live in truth. Saying no is not an act of rejection. It is an act of spiritual strength. Most people don't struggle with saying no because they don't know how. They struggle because no threatens an identity they've spent years building. The reliable one, the helpful one, the one who never lets anyone down. So every time the word no rises in your chest, fear rises with it. Fear of being seen as selfish, fear of being misunderstood, fear of losing connection. And so you say yes, again and again, until your life no longer belongs to you. Every yes costs something: time, energy, attention, presence. When you say yes to what drains you, you say no to something sacred, your peace, your purpose, your inner alignment. But because the loss is invisible, you don't notice it right away. You only notice it later, when you're exhausted, irritated, disconnected from yourself. A no spoken early is gentle. A no delayed becomes resentment. This is why saying no feels so hard at first. It interrupts a pattern. It breaks a rhythm others have come to rely on. But breaking unhealthy patterns is not cruelty. It's clarity. Saying no is not closing your heart. It's honoring your limits. There's a deep spiritual intelligence in knowing where you end. Without limits, your energy scatters. Your focus dissolves. Your life becomes reactive instead of intentional. When you say no with awareness, you're not pushing people away. You're standing in your center. You're saying, I know myself. And self-knowledge is strength. You don't need a dramatic explanation. You don't need to defend your decision. You don't need to soften it until it loses meaning. A calm no is enough. At first, your voice may shake. Your body may tense. That's normal. You're unlearning years of conditioning that equated self-respect with selfishness. But each time you say no and survive the discomfort, your nervous system learns something new. I am safe even when I choose myself. That's freedom. People may react. Some will be disappointed. Some may guilt you. Some may test your resolve. But reactions are not verdicts. They are reflections of their expectations, not your wrongdoing. And here's a quiet truth. People who only feel loved when you say yes don't love you. They rely on you. Real relationships can hold a no. They don't collapse under honesty. They may bend, but they don't break because they're built on mutual respect, not obligation. When you say no, you create space. Space to breathe, space to reflect, space to say yes to what truly matters. That space is not empty. It's fertile. It's where clarity grows. Saying no also teaches others how to treat you. It sets a tone, a boundary, a standard. And standards are not demands. They're invitations to meet you at a higher level of respect. The more you practice saying no, the more natural it becomes. Not cold, not harsh, just clean, and something surprising happens. Your yes becomes more powerful, more meaningful, because now it's chosen, not forced, not habitual, not fear-driven. A yes from clarity car, yes weight. A yes from obligation carries resentment. Choose clarity. Saying no is not turning away from love. It's turning toward truth. And truth spoken calmly and lived fully is one of the strongest forces there is. Then let's face the truth hiding behind the smile. People pleasing is not kindness. Wearing polite clothes. Most people who call themselves nice are not driven by generosity. They are driven by anxiety. Anxiety about being rejected, anxiety about being misunderstood, anxiety about being left. So they learn a survival skill early in life, adapt, appease, blend in. You become what the room needs you to be, quiet when silence is rewarded, agreeable when disagreement feels dangerous, helpful when love feels conditional. And over time, that adaptation becomes an identity. You don't even ask yourself what you want anymore. You ask what will keep the peace, what will make them happy, what will stop the tension. And slowly, your inner voice gets quieter, not because it disappeared, but because it learned it wouldn't be heard. People-pleasing feels safe in the short term. It avoids conflict. It keeps relationships smooth. It earns praise. But the safety is an illusion. Because the more you please, the less you are known. And being loved for a mask is one of the loneliest experiences there is. Fear-based kindness drains you. Truth-based kindness strengthens you. When fear is the motive, your body knows. Your chest tightens before you agree. Your stomach drops when you anticipate a reaction. You rehearse conversations in your head, not to be honest, but to be acceptable. That's not peace, that's vigilance. And vigilance keeps you stuck in survival mode. People-pleasing also creates fragile relationships because they depend on you staying small, quiet, and accommodating. The moment you change, the relationship feels threatened. Not because you became unkind, but because you became real. Some people don't miss you, they miss the version of you that never said no. And that realization can hurt. But it's also freeing because it shows you which connections were built on authenticity and which were built on compliance. Fear convinces you that if you stop pleasing, you'll be alone. But the truth is, you are already alone, just surrounded by people who didn't really know you. When you stop people pleasing, you don't lose connection. You lose false connection. And that space allows real relationships to enter. Relationships where you don't have to perform, where you can exhale, where you can be quiet without guilt and honest without fear. This shift is uncomfortable at first. You may feel exposed, awkward, even selfish. That's because your nervous system is recalibrating. It's learning that safety doesn't come from approval, it comes from self-trust. Self-trust is built every time you honor your inner truth, even when it costs you approval. And the more you do that, the less you need to control how others see you. You stop explaining yourself. You stop rehearsing. You stop bending. You don't become rude, you become real. You still care, you still listen, you still act with compassion. But now Your kindness has a backbone. It's not desperate. It's not transactional. It's grounded. Fear-based niceness asks, will you still like me? Truth-based kindness says, this is who I am. And here's the paradox. When you stop trying so hard to be liked, you become more magnetic. Because authenticity is relaxing, people feel it. They sense the calm, the absence of neediness, the presence of self-respect. Those who are meant to stay will lean in. Those who relied on your fear will drift away. Let them. You were never meant to belong by disappearing. You are meant to belong by being whole. And when fear no longer runs the show, love finally has room to breathe. Then we arrive at a truth that demands maturity, because this one changes how you spend your life. Your energy is sacred, and anything sacred must be handled with care. Most people treat their energy like it's unlimited. They give it away casually, to conversations that go nowhere, to obligations that drain them, to people who only show up when they need something. And then they wonder why they feel empty, unfocused, uninspired. Energy is not just physical strength, it's emotional presence, mental clarity, spiritual attention. Where your energy goes, your life follows. Every interaction either nourishes you or depletes you. Every commitment either aligns you or pulls you away from yourself. And yet, we rarely pause to ask the most important question: is this worthy of my energy? When you don't protect your energy, your life becomes noisy, your thoughts scatter, your intuition dulls. You feel busy but unfulfilled, connected but disconnected from yourself. Sacred energy requires intention. This doesn't mean isolating yourself or becoming cold. It means becoming conscious. It means recognizing that not every call deserves an answer. Not every request deserves a yes. Not every emotion deserves your attention. Attention is a form of prayer. Whatever you give it to grows. When you give your energy to drama, chaos grows. When you give it to resentment, bitterness grows. When you give it to purpose, clarity grows. Many people feel drained not because life is demanding, but because they are unconsciously invested in things that don't matter to their soul. Protecting your energy begins with awareness. Notice how you feel after certain interactions. Do you feel lighter or heavier, clear or confused, grounded or agitated? Your body always knows before your mind does. Fatigue is often a boundary issue. Burnout is often a values issue. You don't need to explain why you're tired. You don't need permission to rest. Rest is not a reward for productivity. It's a requirement for alignment. When you honor your energy, you show up differently. Your words carry weight. Your presence feels calm. Your decisions become intentional instead of reactive. People may accuse you of changing. They're right. You're no longer available to everything. You're available to what matters. And that selectiveness is not arrogance. It's reverence. A life lived without reverence for energy becomes scattered. A life lived with reverence becomes focused, purposeful, and deeply fulfilling. Guard your energy like a red flame, not to hide it, but to make sure it burns bright where it's meant to. And when you do that, you don't just protect your peace, you protect your destiny. Then this is where the journey completes, not with separation but with elevation. When you finally choose yourself, truly choose yourself, something unexpected happens. You don't become smaller, you don't become colder, you don't become selfish in the way the world warned you about. You become an example. Most people think selflessness means disappearing so others can shine, but real transformation works the opposite way. When you stand fully in who you are, you give others permission to do the same. Not through words, but through presence. People are always watching what you tolerate, what you accept, what you normalize. And when you stop betraying yourself, it sends a quiet but powerful message. There is another way to live. Choosing yourself doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you stop rescuing. It means you stop enabling dysfunction. It means you stop teaching people that love requires self-sacrifice. Instead, you model something healthier: wholeness, integrity, balance, and that modeling is contagious. When you honor your needs, others feel invited to honor theirs. When you speak honestly, others feel safer telling the truth. When you set boundaries calmly, others learn that boundaries don't destroy connection, they deepen it. Your growth becomes service, not the exhausting service of overgiving. Boo. The silent service, for example. Some people will rise with you, some will resist, some will fall away. Let that happen. Growth always rearranges relationships. Not because you are leaving people behind, but because you are no longer staying behind with them. And here's the truth: few people are brave enough to accept. When you stay small to make others comfortable, you don't help them grow, you help them stay the same. Choosing yourself is not abandonment, it is leadership. It shows others that self-respect and love can coexist. That strength doesn't require hardness. That boundaries don't kill compassion, they refine it. You become steadier, calmer, less reactive. Your presence alone begins to shift rooms. Not because you're louder, but because you're grounded, and that groundedness is felt. People trust you more when you trust yourself. They listen more when your words come from alignment instead of obligation. They feel safer when your kindness is chosen, not forced. This is the final lesson. The greatest gift you can give the world is a whole you, not a burned out version, not a resentful version, not a silent shrinking version, a whole you. When you stop being too nice, you don't stop being loving. You stop confusing love with self-erasure. You stop trading your soul for approval. You stop apologizing for existing. You stand rooted, present, and from that place your life becomes a message, not one of ego, but of courage, not of selfishness, but of truth. So true. See yourself again and again, not to rise above others, but to rise into who you were always meant to be. Because when you honor your soul, you don't just change your life, you quietly change the world around you. And that is the deepest kind of service there is. Then let me leave you with this. Slow enough to feel it, strong enough to carry with you. You were never meant to be liked by everyone. You're meant to be aligned with yourself. Too many people spend their lives auditioning for love, explaining themselves, overgiving, overextending, hoping that one day it will finally be enough. But enough was never something you had to earn. It was something you had to remember the moment you stopped being too nice. The moment you stop apologizing for your needs, the moment you stop shrinking to fit into spaces that were never meant to hold you, your life begins to tell the truth, and truth is powerful. It may cost you some comfort, it may cost you some familiarity, it may cost you people who only loved the version of you that said yes to everything. But what it gives you in return is priceless: peace, clarity, self-respect, and a quiet confidence that no approval can replace. Choosing yourself is not a one-time decision. It's a daily practice. A moment by moment return to your center. Some days you'll do it well, some days you'll fall back into old habits. That's okay. Growth is not perfection. Growth is honesty. So be honest with yourself about what drains you, about what fulfills you, about what you can give. and what you can't. Protect your energy. Speak your truth. Set your boundaries without anger. Love without losing yourself. And remember this above all else. A life lived in alignment may not impress everyone, but it will never betray you. Stand in your truth, walk in awareness, and don't ever confuse self-erasure with love again. Because when you finally honor who you are, you don't just find peace, you become it. So before you walk back into the noise of the world, remember this. God did not create you to live exhausted, resentful, and afraid of disappointing people. He created you with purpose, with boundaries, with a soul that needs tending. When you put God first, you stop putting people above your peace. When you trust Him, you don't have to earn love by overgiving. When you walk in faith, you learn that obedience to truth is greater than approval from the crowd. Stand firm, speak honestly, choose yourself, not out of pride, but out of obedience to who God called you to be. Because when you honor the life God placed inside you, your light doesn't diminish, it multiplies, and the world doesn't need a nicer version of you. It needs a faithful, whole, and unafraid one before you step back into the noise, before the notifications return, before the world asks you to become smaller again. Because there is a truth you must carry with you, not in your hands, not in your words, but in your spirit. God did not create you by accident. And He did not create you to live exhausted, anxious, and constantly apologizing for taking up space. You were not born to live as a supporting character in everyone else's story. You were not designed to run on empty while calling it love. You are not meant to confuse self-erasure with holiness. God is not honored by your burnout. He is not impressed by your silent suffering. He is not glorified by your resentment. Faith was never meant to make you smaller. Faith was meant to make you whole. Somewhere along the way, many people were taught a distorted version of righteousness. They were taught that being good means being agreeable, that being faithful means never saying no, that serving God requires abandoning yourself. But listen carefully. God does not ask you to destroy yourself to prove your devotion. He asks you to trust Him enough to stand in truth. When you put God first, something shifts inside you. You stop needing everyone's approval because you already have His. You stop over-explaining because you know who you answer to. You stop begging for validation because your identity is rooted, not rented. Putting God first doesn't mean ignoring people. It means no longer worshipping them. It means you stop treating their opinions like commandments. It means you stop confusing their expectations with divine instruction. It means you stop letting fear speak louder than faith. Faith gives you the courage to disappoint people because you are more committed to obedience than popularity. And obedience does not always look gentle. Sometimes it looks like boundaries. Sometimes it looks like rest. Sometimes it looks like walking away from places where your soul cannot breathe. Jesus Himself walked away from crowds. He rested. He withdrew. He said no, not because He didn't love people, but because He knew His assignment. You have an assignment too, and you cannot fulfill it if you are constantly drained, scattered, and pulled apart by everyone else's demands. God gave you energy for a reason, time for a reason, discernment for a reason. Not everyone gets access. Not every request is yours to carry. Not every door is yours to walk through. When you trust God, you stop trying to be everything for everyone because you understand that was never your job. Your job is to be faithful, not available, not convenient. Faithful to truth, faithful to integrity, faithful to the quiet voice inside you that says, this is not right, or this is not for you, or it's time to rest. That voice is not selfish. It is sacred, and when you honor it, you honor the one who placed it there. The world will pressure you to keep giving even when you are empty, to keep smiling even when you are breaking, to keep saying yes even when your spirit is begging for silence. But faith teaches you something different. Faith teaches you that you are allowed to stop, that you are allowed to breathe, that you are allowed to choose alignment over approval. When you choose yourself in faith, you are not choosing ego, you are choosing stewardship. You are saying, God entrusted me with this life, and I will not waste it trying to please everyone. That is not arrogance, that is reverence. And here is what happens when you live this way. Your kindness becomes cleaner, your love becomes stronger, your presence becomes peaceful, because now you are not giving to be accepted. You are giving because you are grounded. You are no longer pouring from fear, you are pouring from faith. And faith changes the quality of everything you touch. People will notice, some will misunderstand, some will resist. Let them. Not everyone will understand your obedience, but you don't need universal understanding. You need inner alignment. When God is first, you don't have to chase. You don't have to prove. You don't have to perform. You walk differently. You speak differently. You choose differently. You stop asking, will this make them happy? And you start asking, is this true? Is this right? Is this aligned? That shift will save your life. Because a life built on approval will collapse the moment approval disappears. But a life built on faith can stand through loss, misunderstanding, and solitude. Faith gives you endurance, not loud confidence, quiet certainty. The kind that doesn't need applause, the kind that doesn't panic when things fall apart, the kind that knows even when it doesn't see. And when you live from that place, you become dangerous in the best way, not aggressive, not controlling, but unshakable. The world cannot manipulate someone who knows who they are in God. It cannot control someone who is no longer afraid of being disliked. It cannot exhaust someone who knows when to stop. This is why choosing yourself is not selfish. It is spiritual maturity. It is saying, I will no longer confuse sacrifice with love. I will no longer betray my soul to keep others comfortable. I will no longer ignore God's guidance to avoid human disappointment. And yes, it will cost you something. It may cost you relationships built on convenience. It may cost you roles you've outgrown. It may cost you the comfort of familiarity. But what it gives you is greater. Peace that doesn't depend on circumstances. Strength that doesn't come from ego. Clarity that cuts through confusion. When you put God first, you don't lose love. You lose illusions. You stop chasing crumbs when you are meant for fullness. You stop settling for noise when you are meant for stillness. You stop calling exhaustion holy when God was calling you to rest. So hear this and carry it with you. God is not asking you to be nicer. He is asking you to be truer, not louder, not harsher, but more honest. Honest about your limits, honest about your needs, honest about what is draining you and what is nourishing you. When you live honestly before God, your life becomes a testimony. Even without words, people will feel something around you. A steadiness, a calm, a groundedness that is faith made visible. So go back into the world. But don't forget who you are. Serve, but don't disappear. Love, but don't abandon yourself. Give, but don't bleed. Put God first. And when you do, everything else finds its proper place. Because faith is not about losing yourself in service. It's about finding yourself in truth. And when you live from that place, whole, faithful, unafraid, you don't just inspire others to change, you remind them what it looks like to be alive. That is the calling, go live it. When you put God first, you stop asking the world who you are. You stop letting noise define you. You stop measuring your worth by applause, approval, or how much you can give away, because faith reorders your life. It teaches you that your value is not in how exhausted you are, not in how available you remain, not in how much of yourself you sacrifice to keep others comfortable. Your value was settled before you ever proved anything. God sees you when you rest. God honors you when you tell the truth. God is pleased when you choose alignment over approval. Somewhere along the way, many people were taught that holiness means constant giving. But God never asked you to pour until you are empty. He asked you to trust Him enough to stop when it's time. Even the land was commanded to rest. Even the strongest were called to pause. Rest is not laziness. Boundaries are not rebellion. Self-respect is not pride. They are wisdom. When you move through life with God first, you begin to listen differently. You feel when something is off. You sense when it's time to leave. You know when to say no, not with anger, not with guilt, but with quiet certainty. And that certainty changes everything. You stop explaining yourself to people who are committed to misunderstanding you. You stop fighting battles God never assigned you. You stop carrying weights that were never meant for your shoulders. You become lighter, not because life is easier, but because you are no longer trying to be everything for everyone. And from that place, your love becomes purer. You serve without resentment. You give without fear. You show up without losing yourself. That is faith in motion. So walk forward with courage. Walk forward with clarity. Walk forward with reverence for the life God placed inside you. Because when God is first, you don't live scattered. You live anchored, and an anchored soul can withstand storms, silence, and seasons of waiting without breaking. Put God first. Trust Him fully and live in a way that honors the gift of your life. That is the path.